His daughter called. "Dad, tomorrow I'm getting married. I just withdrew all the money from your accounts and sold your house. Goodbye." Arthur listened, the sudden shock almost making his 68-year-old knees give out. But then, the retired bank executive just laughed, because she didn't know the secret he had already uncovered. She thought he was just a grieving, confused old fool. But tomorrow, when she walks into her lavish wedding ceremony, the police will be waiting to hand her and her conman groom a very special gift before she ever puts on that ring. The phone line went dead, leaving a hollow click echoing in the air. Arthur Pendleton stood motionless in the center of his quiet living room. The silence of the house pressed against him with a heavy and thick weight. He looked at the framed photograph of his late wife Eleanor resting on the mantelpiece. Her gentle eyes seemed to ask him what he was going to do next. He placed the phone on the coffee table with slow, deliberate precision. A lifetime in the banking industry had taught him that panic was a luxury he could not afford. The trap had been sprung days before Claire even made that arrogant phone call. It started exactly 72 hours earlier on a crisp Thursday morning in Boston. Arthur had been sitting at his mahogany desk nursing a cup of black coffee. He had opened his laptop to check his retirement portfolio as a daily habit he had maintained since stepping down as senior vice president. The screen loaded and the breath vanished from his lungs. The savings account showed a balance of exactly $0. It was a safety net built over 40 years of calculated investments and relentless work. He blinked several times and refreshed the internet browser. The number remained unchanged as a glaring void where hundreds of thousands of dollars should have been. His checking account was similarly decimated, leaving only a meager few $100s. Arthur pulled up the transaction history with hands that remained terrifyingly steady. He traced the digital footprints and found a massive wire transfer to a corporate entity he did not recognize. Another hefty sum had been routed to a luxury wedding planner in the city. The authorization had been executed using a power of attorney. For a brief moment, the 68-year-old widower felt a crushing weight in his chest. It was not just the theft of his life savings that hurt him. It was the name attached to the withdrawals. Claire Pendleton was his own flesh and blood. She was the young woman he had sworn to protect after Eleanor passed away 4 years ago. A profound wave of sorrow washed over him and threatened to pull him under. But that grief quickly hardened into a cold and impenetrable resolve. If someone wanted to play a financial game with an old Wall Street veteran, they had chosen the absolute worst adversary. Arthur picked up his phone and dialed a private number he had not used in nearly 2 years. It belonged to an old colleague at the bank who specialized in fraud detection and asset freezing. The conversation was brief and brutally professional. Arthur explained the forged power of attorney and the unauthorized transfers. Within 20 minutes, every remaining account linked to his name was completely frozen. Alerts were placed on the routing numbers and the internal investigation unit was quietly mobilized. But Arthur knew the bank could only do so much from their end. He needed to know exactly who was pulling the strings. He knew his daughter was not clever enough to orchestrate a corporate-level heist on her own. That same afternoon, Arthur sat in a dimly lit office downtown across from a private investigator. The man was a former federal agent, someone Arthur had utilized decades ago to vet suspicious corporate clients. Arthur handed over a single manila folder containing a photograph of Julian Vance. Julian was the smooth-talking real estate tycoon Claire had been dating for the past 6 months. Arthur laid out the financial anomalies along with the sudden engagement and the drained accounts. He gave the investigator unlimited authorization to dig deep into Julian. He wanted bank records and tax filings and past relationships and any known aliases. He wanted the man disassembled down to his very bones to see what was hiding underneath. The investigator had delivered far beyond Arthur's darkest suspicions. Standing in his living room now with the echo of Claire's voice still lingering in the air, Arthur felt a bitter satisfaction. She thought she was calling to deliver the final blow to a broken old man. She thought she had secured her dream life with a wealthy visionary. She was completely blind to the reality that she was dancing on the edge of a steep precipice. Arthur walked over to his desk and opened a thick investigative report resting on the polished wood. The name printed at the top of the dossier was not Julian Vance. It was Marcus Thorne. Arthur traced the printed name with his index finger while contemplating the storm he was about to unleash. Tomorrow was supposed to be the happiest day of Claire's life. She had traded her father's security for a fragile fantasy built on lies and stolen money. She had mistaken his quiet grief for weakness and his age for senility. She had actively chosen to walk into a trap set by a predator. But Arthur had made a sacred promise to Eleanor on her deathbed. He had promised to protect their daughter no matter the emotional or financial cost. Sometimes true protection meant holding a hand gently in the dark. Sometimes it meant letting them burn their fingers in the fire they started. Tomorrow Arthur was going to let the entire house burn down around her so she could finally learn the truth. Darkness began to envelop the living room as Arthur closed the detective's file. The name Marcus Thorne seemed to dance before his eyes. For such a cunning con artist to siphon off the entire fortune of a former bank vice president, he needed a key. And that key was Claire. His daughter hadn't been born with the ambition of a criminal. This betrayal was the result of a deep, simmering crack that had been breaking for 4 years. Arthur looked up at Eleanor's portrait once more. 4 years ago, cancer had taken her, leaving a huge void in this house that nothing could fill. Eleanor had been the heart, the one who held everything together. When she died, Arthur didn't know how to cope with the pain. Instead of embracing his daughter, he retreated into a shell of silence. He buried himself in his work at the bank, returning home late at night and avoiding conversation. He had left Claire to swim in her own sea of tears. His emotional absence had created a void of despair within her. Claire craved attention, a support system. And Marcus had perfectly sensed that vulnerability. But psychological manipulation was one thing, and seizing complete control of her finances was another. Arthur closed his eyes, forcing his mind back to 3 months earlier. It was the first week of a cold winter, and Arthur had been rushed to the hospital with severe pneumonia. A high fever of 104 degrees had drained all his strength. He lay in a Boston Central Hospital bed, weak, his breath coming in ragged gasps through an oxygen mask, his consciousness reduced to fragmented, hazy memories. That's when Claire arrived. She walked into the hospital room with red eyes and a tear-streaked face. Arthur still vividly remembered the guilt he felt seeing his daughter cry. He thought she was afraid of losing her only remaining relative. Claire sat down beside the bed, taking his hand with a tenderness he hadn't felt in 4 years. Then she opened her bag and took out a stack of papers. She said in a trembling but urgent voice that he needed to sign these papers. She said it was just hospital paperwork. Insurance papers and consent forms for treatment in case he needed a ventilator. The doctor said we had to prepare for the worst. Arthur couldn't read a single word himself. His vision was blurry from the fever, and his head was spinning from the side effects of the high-dose antibiotics. As someone who had spent 40 years reviewing tens of thousands of pages of legal contracts, his instinct was always to be extremely cautious. But the person standing before him wasn't a business partner or a shady client. It was Claire, the little girl he and Eleanor had cherished since birth. He had trusted her with his life. He took the pen from Claire's hand. His hand trembled, but she gently held his wrist, guiding the pen along the dotted lines. He signed 4 times. For shaky, weak signatures, yet they held the full legal weight to strip him of all his power. Now, sitting in the silence of the empty house, that cruel truth cut into his heart like a sharp knife. Those papers had nothing to do with health insurance or consent to treatment. They were a comprehensive power of attorney document concerning his finances and real estate. Claire had given him the power of attorney to personally hand over all his assets to her. Her tears that day weren't for her father lying in his hospital bed. They were tears of tension and fear from having to carry out a heinous scan right in front of the victim. A bitter feeling welled up in Arthur's chest. He blamed himself for his blindness, but more than anything, he realized the extent of Marcus's cruelty. That man had meticulously planned everything, exploiting Arthur's near-death experience to instigate Claire's demise. Marcus knew that a feverish old man would never read the terms. He had turned his daughter into a perfect instrument of crime. Arthur rose, walked to the window, and looked out at the street. Night had completely fallen. His initial anger had given way to a chilling silence. His compassion died the moment he saw the big 0 in his bank account. Claire had made her choice. She had betrayed her own flesh and blood for a hollow promise from a swindler. Tomorrow, she would pay the price for that naivety and greed. Arthur returned to his desk. He was no longer a grieving father consumed by betrayal. He was Arthur Pendleton, a man who had survived countless fierce battles in the business world. He opened his phone, checking his list of calls scheduled for tomorrow. There was no room for tears or regret. Marcus and Claire's charade was over. Now it was time for his game to begin. Arthur sat at his mahogany desk, the glow of the brass reading lamp cutting through the heavy darkness of the study. He had already absorbed the initial shock of the name Marcus Thorne the night before. Now, he needed to dissect the anatomy of the man's lies. He flipped open the thick dossier provided by the private investigator. The pages were a testament to a life built entirely on calculated deception. Marcus Thorne was 36 years old, chronically unemployed, and drowning in a sea of toxic debt. He did not own the luxury vehicle he drove. It was leased and 3 months behind on payments. The upscale apartment he bragged about to Claire was facing an active eviction notice. But the financial ruin was only the surface. Arthur turned to the section detailing the supposed family of Julian Vance. He remembered the dinner 6 months ago where he had met the parents, an elegant couple who spoke at length about their generational wealth in commercial real estate. The investigator had shattered that illusion with a few simple keystrokes. Their names were Richard and Brenda, 2 struggling theater actors from the local circuit. Marcus had paid them $3,000 to play the role of wealthy in-laws. He had handed them a script, dressed them in rented designer clothing, and directed a performance designed specifically to lower Arthur's defenses. Arthur did not feel anger as he read the actors' profiles. He felt the cold and calculating precision of a senior executive identifying a critical vulnerability in a hostile corporate takeover. He kept reading. The dossier outlined 2 previous victims in different states. Both were successful and lonely women who had their savings drained by a charming man pitching fake investment opportunities. Both times, Marcus had vanished before the authorities could build a solid case. Then Arthur reached the final page of the financial summary, and his jaw locked tightly. There was an active bench warrant for Marcus Thorne in a neighboring county for unpaid child support spanning 3 years. Marcus had a 4-year-old daughter he had completely abandoned. The amount owed was over $50,000. Arthur cross-referenced the date of the warrant with the wire transfers Claire had authorized from his stolen funds. The puzzle pieces snapped together with sickening clarity. Marcus had used Arthur's retirement money to pay off the child support arrears. It was a desperate and calculated move to clear his criminal record just enough to secure a legal marriage license with Claire. He had used the father's money to bury the existence of his own child. Arthur closed the folder. The time for reading in the dark was over. At 8 o'clock the next morning, exactly 24 hours before Claire was scheduled to walk down the aisle, Arthur walked through the glass doors of a prestigious law firm in downtown Boston. He was dressed in his sharpest navy suit, the exact suit he wore when negotiating billion-dollar mergers. He was guided into a private conference room overlooking the city skyline. Waiting for him were his longtime attorney, Thomas, and Detective Miller from the Financial Crimes Division of the Boston Police Department. Arthur did not waste time with pleasantries. He placed his own meticulously organized binders on the glass table. He laid out the frozen bank statements, the hospital records, and the private investigator's comprehensive dossier. The notary's signature on the power of attorney is a complete forgery, Arthur stated, his voice steady and commanding. I checked the state registry. The notary commission expired 6 months ago, and travel records placed that specific notary in Florida on the day my daughter supposedly had me sign these documents in a Boston hospital. Detective Miller reviewed the documents, his eyebrows raising as he absorbed the sheer volume of undeniable evidence. You have essentially done our entire investigation for us, Mr. Pendleton. This is textbook elder financial abuse, wire fraud, and identity theft. We have more than enough probable cause to secure an arrest warrant for Marcus Thorne right now. I do not just want a warrant, Arthur said. He leaned forward and rested his hands firmly on the glass table. I want the arrest executed tomorrow. At the wedding ceremony. Right before the exchange of vows. Thomas sighed heavily and took off his glasses. Arthur, that is highly unorthodox. The police usually pick suspects up at their residence. Doing it at a high-profile wedding will cause a massive public spectacle. It will completely humiliate Claire. Claire needs to be humiliated, Arthur replied without a single ounce of hesitation. If you arrest him quietly today, he will spin a lie. He will tell her it is a massive misunderstanding, or worse, that I framed him because I am a jealous and controlling father. She is deeply manipulated, Thomas. If she does not see his world completely collapse in front of everyone she knows, she will continue to defend him. She needs to see the steel handcuffs. She needs to hear his real name read out loud by a police officer in front of her friends. Detective Miller slowly closed the binder. He looked at the retired banker with a mixture of professional respect and quiet apprehension. Marcus Thorne is a documented flight risk. He ran from his last 2 victims the moment he suspected trouble. If we move in while he is standing at the altar, he will be completely cornered. No exits and no advanced warning. I will talk to the district attorney. We can make the timing work perfectly. Ensure you have a secondary vehicle, Arthur added, his tone utterly devoid of emotion. When the illusion breaks, my daughter is going to need a very quiet place to fall apart. But Marcus leaves in the back of a squad car. The meeting concluded with a firm handshake. The legal and tactical trap was officially set. Arthur took the elevator down to the busy city street. The crisp morning air filled his lungs. He had secured the warrants. He had aligned the authorities. The structural integrity of Marcus Thorne's lies had been systematically dismantled. There was only one loose end left to tie before the wedding. He needed to find the woman Marcus had abandoned and the 4-year-old little girl who had been erased from existence. Arthur hailed a taxi and gave the driver an address located in the working-class suburbs. The banker was going to pay a visit to the forgotten victims. The taxi pulled away from the towering glass structures of downtown Boston and navigated toward the working-class neighborhoods of the outer suburbs. Arthur watched the scenery change from polished marble lobbies to faded brick apartment complexes. He carried a heavy heart but a brilliantly clear mind. The address the private investigator had provided belonged to a woman named Sarah. She was the collateral damage Marcus Thorne had discarded 4 years ago. She was the living proof of his absolute ruthlessness. Arthur paid the driver and stepped onto the cracked sidewalk. The autumn wind was biting, but he hardly felt it. He walked up 2 flights of concrete stairs and knocked firmly on a peeling wooden door. Footsteps echoed from inside, followed by the sound of a deadbolt clicking open. The door opened a few inches, revealing a woman in her early 30s. She had dark circles under her tired eyes and wore faded blue medical scrubs. "Yes?" she asked, her voice thick with exhaustion and caution. "Sarah?" Arthur asked softly. "My name is Arthur Pendleton. You do not know me, but my daughter is scheduled to marry a man named Marcus Thorne tomorrow afternoon." The color instantly drained from the young woman's face. Her grip tightened on the edge of the door, and for a second Arthur thought she was going to slam it shut in his face. But the quiet authority and profound sorrow in the older man's eyes made her pause. Arthur did not look like a threat. He looked like a father carrying an impossible burden. He asked for 5 minutes of her time. Reluctantly, she opened the door wider and allowed him to step inside. The apartment was small but meticulously clean. Crayons and coloring books were scattered neatly on a modest coffee table. In the corner of the room, a little girl with curly brown hair was sitting on the carpet playing with a set of wooden blocks. Arthur felt a physical punch to his gut. The child had the exact same jawline and dark eyes as the man who had robbed him. This was the 4-year-old daughter Marcus had entirely erased from his fabricated reality. Arthur sat at a small kitchen table across from Sarah. He did not waste time with pleasantries. He laid out the brutal truth. He explained how Marcus had reinvented himself as a wealthy real estate investor named Julian Vance. He detailed the forged power of attorney and the stolen retirement funds. Then Arthur gently brought up the bench warrant for unpaid child support. He wired over $50,000 to the state registry a few days ago to clear his debt, Arthur said, his voice steady and full of empathy. That money did not come from a sudden business success. He stole my life savings to buy his freedom. He did it solely so he could secure a legal marriage license with my daughter and drain her dry next. Sarah covered her mouth as silent tears spilled over her cheeks. The revelation shattered her completely. She explained how Marcus had charmed her years ago and then abandoned her when she was 6 months pregnant. He had drained her modest savings to fund his next con and left her to raise their daughter completely alone. She had worked double shifts at a local clinic just to keep the electricity running and put food on the table. When the unexpected child support payment arrived last week, she thought it was a miracle. Now she realized it was blood money stolen from an elderly widower. Arthur listened in complete silence. He felt a deep kinship with this exhausted single mother. They were both victims of the exact same predator. Marcus preyed on the vulnerable, whether it was a lonely young woman craving love or a grieving old man weakened by illness. Arthur reached into his tailored suit jacket and pulled out a pristine white envelope. He slid it across the kitchen table. "This is a cashier check for $20,000, Arthur said softly. "It is drawn from a private trust my late wife Eleanor and I established decades ago. It is completely separate from the accounts Marcus compromised. It is clean money, Sarah. It is yours to keep, with absolutely no strings attached." You and your daughter deserve stability and peace." Sarah stared at the envelope. Her hands trembled violently. "Why are you doing this?" she whispered. Arthur looked over at the little girl playing in the corner. "Because a predator used my family to victimize yours," Arthur replied. "I cannot undo the past 4 years of your suffering. But I can make certain he never does this to another woman again. I need your help, Sarah. I need you to stand in a courtroom and tell a judge exactly who Marcus Thorne is. I need my daughter to look at you and see the devastating human cost of the lies she is desperately defending." Sarah wiped her tears. She looked at her daughter and then back at the retired banker. The exhaustion in her eyes was suddenly replaced by a fierce and protective fire. The fear Marcus had instilled in her was finally gone. "I will be there," Sarah said firmly. "I will testify to everything." Arthur stood up and nodded with profound respect. He thanked her and quietly let himself out of the apartment. As he walked down the concrete stairs and back out into the cold Boston afternoon, his heart beat with a steady and terrifying rhythm. The legal net was now perfectly inescapable. Every lie Marcus had told was officially backed into a corner. Arthur pulled out his phone. The afternoon was fading into evening. It was time to make one final phone call to his daughter. It was time to give Claire one last chance to save herself before the entire world crashed down around her. The evening sky over Boston had faded into a deep and bruised purple by the time Arthur Pendleton returned to his empty house. The silence inside was absolute. Tomorrow was the wedding. He poured himself a glass of water and sat in his heavy leather armchair. He placed his mobile phone on the side table. For an hour he did nothing but watch the shadows lengthen across the hardwood floor. He had secured the police involvement. He had secured the key witness in Sarah. The legal net was drawn completely tight. Yet a tiny fragile fragment of his heart still ached for the little girl who used to hold his hand while walking to the park on Sunday mornings. He felt he owed it to his late wife Eleanor to offer Claire one final exit. It was a terrible risk to tip his hand, but he needed to know if any part of his real daughter still existed. He picked up the phone and dialed her number. It rang 3 times before she answered. The background noise was loud with clinking wine glasses and vibrant laughter. She was likely at the rehearsal dinner. It was a lavish dinner funded entirely by his stolen retirement savings. "What do you want?" Claire asked. Her tone was sharp and coated with thick annoyance. "I need you to step away from the noise and listen to me very carefully," Arthur said. His voice was calm and deliberately measured. "You need to cancel the wedding tomorrow." Claire let out a bitter and condescending laugh. "Are you calling to ruin my rehearsal dinner? You froze the accounts yesterday. You have caused enough drama. Julian and I are getting married and you are not invited. That is final." "The man you are marrying is not Julian Vance," Arthur replied. He ignored her childish anger and pressed forward with the cold facts. "His real name is Marcus Thorne. He hired actors to play his wealthy parents. He is drowning in massive debt. And just a few days ago he used my stolen money to pay off 3 years of back child support for a 4-year-old daughter he abandoned. I met the mother today. Her name is Sarah." There was a long and heavy silence on the line. Arthur waited for the shock to settle. He waited for the tears and for the horrifying realization to wash over her. Instead, he heard a muffled shuffling sound. When the voice returned, it was not Claire. It was the smooth and arrogant baritone of the man claiming to be Julian. "Mr. Pendleton," Marcus said smoothly. "I see you are still struggling with your confusion. Claire warned me you might try something like this. I am not confused, Marcus, Arthur said. He injected every ounce of his former corporate authority into his tone. The police know exactly who you are. The district attorney has your real file. If you show up at that church tomorrow, you will not leave as a free man. Marcus let out a soft and mocking chuckle. You are bluffing. You are just a bitter old widower who cannot handle the fact that his daughter is moving on. But since you want to play hardball, let us talk about the reality of your situation. The background noise faded completely. Marcus had clearly moved into a private room. Claire and I spoke with a family attorney this afternoon, Marcus continued. His voice dropped to a sinister whisper. We have the medical records from your hospital stay 3 months ago. The severe pneumonia. The fever of 104 degrees. The documented periods of delirium. You signed that power of attorney because your health was failing, Arthur. Your mind is going. Arthur felt the air turn freezing cold in his study. The temperature in the room seemed to drop 10 degrees. What exactly are you threatening? It is not a threat, Marcus replied smoothly. It is a medical intervention. If you do not contact the bank first thing Monday morning to unfreeze the accounts and drop these insane delusions about fake names and secret children, Claire is going to file a petition for emergency guardianship. She is your only living relative. She will testify under oath that you are paranoid and mentally incompetent. We have already selected a memory care facility for you. It is located in a very quiet area upstate. The doors lock from the outside. You will be very comfortable there, and Claire will take full legal control of the remaining estate. Arthur gripped the armrest of his chair. A memory care facility. They were planning to lock him inside a psychiatric ward for dementia patients. They were going to strip away his freedom and his dignity and his mind. They intended to bury him alive in a sterile room just to steal the remaining fractions of his wealth. It was the ultimate corporate hostile takeover applied directly to a human life. Claire, Arthur said sharply. I know you are listening on speakerphone. Tell me this is a lie. The silence stretched for 3 agonizing seconds. Then Claire spoke. Her voice did not shake. It was terrifyingly cold and devoid of any familial warmth. You need help, Dad, she said. You are making up wild stories about Julian having a secret child and fake parents. It is sad to watch. You have not been the same since Mom died. Julian is right. If you do not stop this embarrassing crusade, we will have to make medical decisions for your own good. We will put you somewhere safe where you cannot hurt yourself or our family. The final delicate thread of parental mercy snapped. It did not break with a loud noise. It dissolved quietly into absolute nothingness. Claire was no longer just a manipulated victim blinded by love. She was a willing accomplice who was ready to institutionalize her own father to protect a stolen lifestyle. She had weaponized his grief over Eleanor to justify her unspeakable greed. Arthur did not yell. He did not plead for his daughter to wake up. He simply leaned back in his leather chair and looked at the portrait of Eleanor on the mantelpiece. The promise he made to protect their daughter had been fulfilled to the best of his ability. He had offered her the brutal truth. She had chosen the comfortable lie. I understand completely, Arthur said. His voice was utterly devoid of emotion. It was the exact voice of a senior banker closing down a permanently bankrupt account. I wish you both exactly what you deserve tomorrow. He ended the call. He placed the phone face down on the polished wooden table. The house was completely silent once again, but Arthur Pendleton was no longer burdened by the heavy weight of a broken heart. He felt only the supreme clarity of absolute justice. He stood up and walked slowly to the hallway closet to retrieve his finest dark suit. He needed to make sure it was perfectly pressed for the wedding. The grandfather clock in the hallway struck 10 times, its deep chimes resonating through the empty house. Arthur Pendleton carefully hung his freshly pressed navy suit in the closet. The fabric was pristine and ready for the wedding ceremony. The brutal threat of being locked in a memory care facility still echoed in his mind, but it did not instill fear. It only galvanized his absolute resolve. Claire had chosen her side. Now, Arthur had to ensure that the ground she stood on would collapse completely by tomorrow afternoon. He walked back into his dimly lit study and sat at his mahogany desk. There was one final tactical maneuver required to make the police case entirely bulletproof. He opened the private investigator's dossier to the section detailing Richard and Brenda. They were the struggling theater actors who had gladly accepted $3,000 to play the roles of wealthy commercial real estate investors. Marcus Thorne was banking on their performance tomorrow to maintain his illusion in front of the wedding guests. Arthur was going to pull the curtain down before the show even started. He picked up his phone and dialed the number listed for Richard. The line rang 4 times before a groggy voice answered. "Hello," the man said. "Good evening," Arthur said. His tone was not angry. It carried the chilling, measured authority of a senior bank executive initiating a hostile audit. "My name is Arthur Pendleton. You know me as the father of the bride you have been hired to deceive tomorrow." There was a sharp intake of breath on the other end. "I think you have the wrong number," Richard stammered, his voice suddenly pitching higher with panic. "Do not insult my intelligence by hanging up, Richard," Arthur commanded smoothly. "If you end this call, my next dial will be to the Boston Police Department. I have your full legal name, your residential address, and the exact digital routing numbers detailing the $3,000 Marcus Thorne wired to you." The silence on the line was thick and suffocating. Arthur heard a woman whispering frantically in the background. Brenda was awake. "Put me on speakerphone," Arthur ordered. A second later, a tiny electronic click confirmed he had an audience of 2. "Listen to me very carefully. The man who hired you is not an eccentric billionaire trying to impress his fiancé. His real name is Marcus Thorne. He is a serial con artist with multiple active warrants. The money he used to pay you was stolen directly from my retirement accounts using forged legal documents." "We did not know," Brenda blurted out, her voice trembling violently. "I swear to God, Mr. Pendleton. We just thought it was a bizarre acting gig." He told us he was estranged from his real family and wanted to give his bride a perfect wedding. We had no idea the money was stolen. Arthur leaned forward, resting his elbows on the leather blotter of his desk. Ignorance is not a valid legal defense when you are an accessory to a felony. By showing up tomorrow and posing as his family, you are actively participating in federal wire fraud, identity theft, and the financial exploitation of a senior citizen. The district attorney is already drafting the indictments. If you walk into that church tomorrow, you will leave in handcuffs right alongside him. You will face a minimum of 10 years in a federal penitentiary." He could hear the actors breathing heavily, paralyzed by the sheer magnitude of the disaster they had stepped into. Arthur let the terror marinate for exactly 5 seconds before offering them their only escape route. "I do not care about punishing 2 desperate actors," Arthur said coldly. "My only target is Marcus Thorne. I am offering you a singular opportunity to save yourselves. You will not attend the wedding tomorrow. And right now, you are going to send me every piece of evidence tying you to his operation." "Evidence?" Richard asked weakly. "What do you need?" "Everything," Arthur demanded. I want the original script he provided you. I want screenshots of every single text message and email exchange. I want the digital receipts of the $3,000 transfer. I want it all in my inbox within the next 15 minutes. If you provide this, I will personally instruct my lead detective to classify you as cooperating witnesses rather than co-conspirators. If you fail to send it, I will let the police tear your lives apart. We will send it, Brenda cried out immediately. We will send everything right now. Please just keep us out of jail. 15 minutes, Arthur repeated, and he terminated the call. He leaned back in his chair and watched the glowing screen of his laptop. The digital clock in the corner of the screen ticked forward. He did not have to wait long. Exactly 8 minutes later, a notification chimed in the quiet room. An email had arrived from Richard with a massive compressed file attached. Arthur opened the documents one by one. It was a flawless victory. There were dozens of text messages from Marcus explicitly detailing what to wear, how to act, and what lies to tell Arthur about their fake real estate empire. There was a literal PDF script highlighting conversation topics to distract the father of the bride. And most importantly, there were clear financial receipts linking Marcus Thorne directly to the fraudulent payments. Arthur highlighted the entire batch of files and forwarded them to Detective Miller and his attorney, Thomas. He typed a single, brief message in the body of the email. The final nails have been secured. Do not be late tomorrow. He closed the laptop. The glowing screen faded to black, leaving the study in peaceful darkness. The chessboard was set. The pieces were trapped. Marcus and Claire had built a magnificent empire out of stolen money and arrogant lies, completely unaware that a retired banker had quietly rigged the entire foundation with explosives. Arthur stood up and walked toward his bedroom to finally get some sleep. Tomorrow was going to be a very long day. The Saturday afternoon sun bathed the historic Boston estate in a warm golden glow. Arthur Pendleton sat in the back seat of a tinted black sedan parked discreetly at the edge of the manicured lawn. Beside him sat his attorney Thomas. Through the open windows of the grand pavilion, the soft notes of a string quartet drifted into the crisp autumn air. It was a flawlessly executed event. It was also an active crime scene. Arthur watched the shadows of the attendees moving behind the translucent white curtains. There were over 100 guests inside. Claire had spared absolutely no expense using the funds she had maliciously drained from her father. The floral arrangements alone likely cost more than a luxury vehicle. Arthur felt a grim satisfaction knowing there were 2 specific empty seats in the front row. Richard and Brenda, the hired actors, had wisely taken Arthur's advice and fled the city that morning. Marcus Thorne was curtly standing at the altar trying to maintain his confident facade while secretly panicking over the sudden and unexplained disappearance of his rented parents. The music swelled to a triumphant crescendo. Arthur could envision Claire walking down the aisle in her designer gown. She was walking toward a complete mirage. She had traded the unwavering love of a father for the hollow promises of a parasite. She had chosen a man who viewed her as nothing more than a convenient bank account. A few yards away, 2 unmarked police cruisers and a standard patrol car waited in the shadow of a massive oak tree. Detective Miller stood by the lead vehicle checking his watch. The timing had to be immaculate. They waited for the exact moment the officiant asked for the rings. They waited for the moment when the illusion was at its absolute peak so the fall would be completely unforgettable. Detective Miller raised his hand and signaled his officers. For uniformed policemen and 2 plainclothes detectives moved swiftly toward the heavy pavilion doors. Arthur rolled down his window completely. He needed to hear the collapse of the empire he had funded. Inside the pavilion, the officiant was speaking about eternal trust and unbroken bonds. He asked the groom for the rings. The heavy double doors of the pavilion suddenly swung open with a violent crash that echoed over the silent crowd. The string quartet stopped playing instantly. A collective gasp rippled through the audience. Detective Miller marched straight down the center aisle with his gold badge held high. Guests murmured in shock and pulled their chairs back. Claire turned around and her delicate veil caught in the autumn breeze. Her face was a portrait of pure confusion. Marcus froze completely at the altar. His arrogant smirk dissolved into sheer animal panic. He took one step backward looking for an escape route, but two large officers had already flanked the altar, blocking every possible exit. Marcus Thorne, Detective Miller projected his voice so every single person in the room could hear it clearly. He deliberately did not use the fake name Julian Vance. You are under arrest for felony wire fraud, identity theft, and the financial exploitation of a vulnerable adult. Put your hands behind your back immediately. The entire pavilion erupted into pure chaos. Claire let out a piercing scream that shattered the elegant atmosphere. What are you doing? His name is Julian. Get away from him. She grabbed the arm of one of the officers, wrinkling her pristine white dress. Marcus did not fight. The fundamental cowardice that defined his entire existence finally surfaced. He let the officers twist his arms behind his back and secure the heavy steel handcuffs. The metallic click was loud enough to cut through the rising panic of the wedding guests. Julian, tell them. Claire shrieked as tears ruined her immaculate makeup. Tell them they are making a massive mistake. Tell them who you are. Marcus looked at the floor, refusing to meet her eyes. He had absolutely nothing to say. The script was gone and there were no actors left to save him. Detective Miller looked at the hysterical bride with a mixture of pity and professional detachment. There is no mistake, miss. Julian Vance does not exist. The man you are trying to marry has outstanding warrants in multiple counties. His hired actors turned state evidence last night and handed over all their financial receipts. The game is over. Arthur opened the door of the sedan and stepped out onto the gravel driveway. He did not walk into the pavilion to gloat. He merely stood quietly by the open doors as the officers escorted the prisoner out. Marcus was marched down the exact aisle he had just intended to conquer. He looked up and saw Arthur standing by the exit. The defeated con artist lowered his head, unable to meet the freezing and victorious gaze of the retired banker. Claire stumbled out of the pavilion moments later, clutching the heavy fabric of her dress. She watched the officers push Marcus into the back of a police cruiser. Then she turned her head and saw her father standing quietly in his immaculate navy suit. The absolute horror of realization finally washed over her pale face. The memory care facility threat she had made just last night echoed back to her in the cold daylight. She had arrogantly threatened the titan of the financial world, and he had responded by burning her entire false reality to ashes. Arthur did not smile, and he did not say a single word to her. He simply watched the police vehicle drive away with the man who had tried to destroy his family. The wedding was officially canceled, and the harsh education of Claire Pendleton had just begun. The sterile fluorescent lights of the Boston Police Department offered no warmth. Claire Pendleton sat at a cold metal table. She was still wearing her elaborate designer wedding gown. The layers of white silk and intricate lace spilled over the cheap institutional chair, making her look like a tragic and misplaced ghost. Her mascara had run down her pale cheeks, leaving dark tracks of ruined arrogance. The heavy steel door opened. Detective Miller walked into the interrogation room carrying a thick stack of manila folders. He did not look at her with the gentle sympathy usually reserved for a heartbroken bride. He looked at her with the calculating scrutiny of an investigator sitting across from a primary suspect in a federal wire fraud case. "Miss Pendleton," Detective Miller said as he took the seat opposite her. He placed the heavy folders on the metal table. "I need you to understand the severity of your current situation. You are not just sitting here as a victim of a romantic scam. You are sitting here because your signature is on a forged power of attorney that facilitated the theft of hundreds of thousands of dollars from a vulnerable senior citizen. You are legally an accessory to multiple felonies." Claire wrapped her arms around herself. She was shivering despite the stale warmth of the precinct. "I did not know," she whispered. Her voice was hoarse and broken. "Julian told me my father was losing his mind. He told me we needed to protect the money before the state took it. I loved him. He loved me." Detective Miller opened the first folder. He did not raise his voice. He simply let the absolute truth do the crushing work. "The man you know as Julian Vance does not know how to love. He only knows how to audit vulnerabilities. Let us start with his family." The detective slid a printed document across the table. It was the digital script Arthur had forwarded from the actors. "These are the exact talking points your fiancé emailed to Richard and Brenda," Miller explained. "He paid them $3,000 to pretend to be his wealthy parents. Look at the highlighted sections. He specifically instructed them on what to say to lower your father's defenses. It was a paid theatrical performance and you were the primary audience." Claire stared at the printed pages. She recognized the exact phrases the elegant couple had used during their dinner 6 months ago. The lavish tales of commercial real estate. The warm smiles. It was all meticulously typed out in a standard font. The foundation of her perfect romance cracked. Miller withdrew another document. It was a stack of bank statements showing the flow of Arthur's stolen retirement funds. "You believed he was investing this money into a joint future," Miller continued relentlessly. "Let me show you where your father's life savings actually went. Marcus Thorne has not held a legitimate job in 5 years. He was facing eviction from his luxury apartment. His vehicle was pending repossession. But his most pressing issue was an active bench warrant in a neighboring county for criminal non-payment of child support." Claire looked up. Her breath hitched in her throat. "Child support." Miller slid a photograph across the table. It showed a young woman named Sarah holding a 4-year-old girl with curly brown hair. "He abandoned this woman when she was 6 months pregnant," Miller stated coldly. "He left her destitute. But to marry you he needed a clean background check to secure the marriage license without triggering an arrest. So he used $50,000 of the money you stole from your father to pay off his arrears. You were not his partner, Claire. You were his automated teller machine. You were his golden ticket to stay out of a prison cell." The silence in the interrogation room became absolute and suffocating. The sheer magnitude of the betrayal crashed down on Claire. Every romantic whisper, every grand promise, every gentle touch from Marcus was suddenly recontextualized as a calculated maneuver to access her father's bank accounts. He had never loved her. He had audited her emotional void and exploited her grief over her mother. He had convinced her to betray the only man in the world who truly cared for her. She remembered the phone call she had made to Arthur just last night. She had threatened to lock her own father in a memory care facility. She had spoken to him with dripping venom and supreme arrogance, fully believing she was standing on the moral high ground alongside a visionary billionaire. Now she realized she was nothing more than a foolish pawn who had handed the executioner the very axe meant to destroy her family. Claire buried her face in her hands. A guttural sob tore through her throat. It was a sound of absolute devastation and profound shame. She wept for the illusion she had worshipped and for the father she had crucified. On the other side of the mirrored glass, Arthur Pendleton stood in the darkened observation room. His attorney Thomas stood quietly beside him. Arthur watched his daughter unravel completely under the harsh fluorescent lights. He did not feel any joy in her pain. There was no victory in watching his own flesh and blood shatter into a million pieces. But he knew this agony was the only way to purge the poison Marcus had injected into her mind. "Are they going to charge her?" Thomas asked quietly. "Yes," Arthur replied without taking his eyes off the glass. "She committed a crime. She must face the legal consequences of her actions. But she is finally awake. The illusion is dead. Now we can begin the actual work." Arthur turned his back on the observation window and walked out of the precinct. The trap had closed perfectly. Marcus Thorne was locked in a holding cell and Claire was stripped of her blinding arrogance. The next battlefield would be the courtroom, and a retired banker was already preparing his final testimony. 7 months passed before the doors of the Suffolk County Courthouse finally opened for the trial. The bitter and unforgiving Boston winter had slowly surrendered to a mild spring, but the chill inside the courtroom remained absolute. Arthur Pendleton walked through the heavy oak doors wearing a sharp charcoal suit. He carried no anger in his posture. He carried only the quiet and unyielding resolve of a man seeing a painful architectural project through to its final inspection. His attorney Thomas walked beside him carrying the heavy leather briefcases that contained the prosecution exhibits. The courtroom was paneled in dark polished wood and illuminated by stark overhead lighting. The gallery was sparsely populated with a few local journalists and court clerks. Arthur took his seat in the front row. He directed his gaze toward the defense tables. Claire sat at the table on the left. She looked incredibly fragile. The extravagant designer clothing she used to flaunt had been replaced by a conservative beige blouse and a dark skirt. Her hands trembled constantly as they rested on the wooden table. She did not look back at the gallery. She stared straight ahead as if bracing herself for an execution. At the adjacent table sat Marcus Thorne. He wore a standard-issue orange prison jumpsuit. His wrists were free, but his ankles were shackled to the floor. The confident and towering posture of the fake real estate tycoon had completely evaporated. He was replaced by the twitching and cornered manifestation of a trapped animal. He whispered frantically to his public defender while casting nervous glances toward the jury box. The trial commenced with the opening statements from the district attorney. She was a fierce and methodical prosecutor who painted a precise picture of a calculated predator targeting a vulnerable, grieving family. She detailed the forged documents and the stolen retirement accounts and the fake identities. The jury listened with rapt attention as the sheer scale of the deception was laid out methodically. The prosecution then called their witnesses one by one. Richard and Brenda took the stand first. The two actors had accepted immunity deals in exchange for their full cooperation. They read their text messages aloud for the court record. They confirmed Marcus paid them $3,000 to memorize a specific script and pose as wealthy investors to deceive a retired bank executive. Marcus scowled furiously at the defense table, but his lawyer offered very little cross-examination. The digital paper trail was absolutely undeniable. Then Sarah walked to the witness stand. The large courtroom grew incredibly quiet as the exhausted single mother spoke into the microphone. She recounted the false promises Marcus had made to her 4 years ago. She described the brutal reality of raising their child alone while he dodged court orders and hid his income. Then she confirmed receiving a wire transfer of over $50,000 the exact week of the canceled wedding. Arthur watched Claire closely during this testimony. Claire squeezed her eyes shut as heavy tears leaked out and rolled down her pale cheeks. Hearing the voice of the woman Marcus had ruthlessly discarded shattered whatever tiny and pathetic fragments of denial Claire might have still harbored. She was listening to her own alternate future being described under oath. When the prosecution finally rested their devastating case, the atmosphere in the room shifted. It was time for the defense. The attorney representing Marcus stood up and approached the jury. He did not attempt to deny the fake parents or the abandoned child. The evidence was too overwhelming. Instead, he pivoted the entire defense strategy toward a single shocking narrative. He pointed his finger directly at Claire Pendleton. The defense attorney argued that Marcus was certainly a flawed man with financial troubles, but he was not the mastermind of the bank fraud. He claimed Claire was the true architect of the theft. The attorney stated that Claire deeply resented her father for his emotional distance after her mother passed away. According to the defense narrative, Claire knew her father was incredibly wealthy. She knew his account details. She forged the power of attorney entirely on her own while her father was weak in the hospital. Marcus was falsely portrayed as a naive and trusting boyfriend who believed his wealthy fiancé was simply utilizing her family trust fund to pay off his debts and plan their wedding. The defense argued that Marcus had lied about his background out of shame, but he had never orchestrated the theft of the retirement accounts. To solidify this despicable lie, Marcus insisted on taking the stand to testify in his own defense. He sat in the witness chair and looked at the jury with practiced sincerity. He spoke in a soft and pleading voice, claiming Claire had manipulated him. He swore under penalty of perjury that he had no idea the money was stolen. He said Claire told him Arthur approved of the transfers to help them start a new life. Marcus threw the woman who had loved him completely to the wolves. He sacrificed her without a single ounce of hesitation just to shave a few years off his impending prison sentence. He weaponized her genuine grief over her deceased mother and her mistakes against her in open court. He painted her as a sociopathic thief and the sole villain of the entire tragedy. Claire stared at Marcus in absolute horror. Her mouth parted slightly, but no sound came out. The man she had planned to marry was sitting under oath and dismantling her character piece by piece. Every lie he told on the stand was another brutal stab to her chest. The manipulation was completely laid bare in the most violent way possible. Arthur sat in the gallery with his hands folded neatly in his lap. He felt a deep and agonizing ache in his chest for his daughter. She was experiencing the ultimate betrayal in the most public forum imaginable. But the retired banker knew this fiery crucible was entirely necessary. The unforgiving flames of the courtroom were burning away the very last remnants of her toxic dependency. Marcus was doing exactly what cowardly predators always do when cornered. He was devouring his own ally to survive. And in doing so, he was handing Claire the final piece of absolute clarity she needed to end the war. The echo of Marcus Thorne shifting the entire blame onto his former fiancée still hung in the chilling air of the courtroom. Claire Pendleton remained absolutely frozen at the defense table. The betrayal was a physical blow that knocked the final remnants of breath from her lungs. She stared at the man she had planned to marry just 7 months ago. The charismatic visionary was entirely gone. In his place sat a cowardly parasite desperately trying to feed her to the wolves to save his own skin. Her defense attorney leaned over and whispered a quiet question. Claire closed her eyes and nodded once. It was a slow and deliberate movement. The illusion was completely dead and buried. Only the bitter truth remained, and she was finally ready to speak it. Claire was called to the witness stand. She walked with heavy and exhausted steps. She placed her hand on the Bible and swore to tell the whole truth. When her attorney asked her to explain her exact role in the financial theft, she did not deflect or make excuses. She looked directly at the jury and confessed to everything. She detailed how she had slipped the forged power of attorney into a stack of routine medical papers while her father was battling severe pneumonia. She admitted she had initiated the wire transfers. She confessed to her blinding greed and her misplaced anger over her mother passing away. She owned her guilt without shedding a single tear of self-pity. But then she turned her attention to Marcus. Her voice steadied. She described how he had methodically isolated her from her father. She testified that Marcus was the one who procured the expired notary stamp from a shady contact. She revealed the existence of a secondary encrypted email account Marcus had used to instruct her. He had taught her exactly how to bypass the secondary security protocols of her father's checking accounts. Claire reached into her pocket and handed a small stack of printed emails to the court clerk. The documents explicitly proved Marcus was the primary architect of the entire financial heist. In his own written words, Marcus had directed her on which specific accounts to drain first and how to mask the transfers under the guise of wedding vendor payments. He had literally written the blueprint for the robbery. Marcus sank low into his wooden chair. His fabricated defense of being a naive and trusting boyfriend completely collapsed under the crushing weight of his own written instructions. The jury looked at him with absolute and unfiltered disgust. After the closing arguments concluded, the judge asked if the victim wished to address the court before the final sentencing was delivered. Arthur Pendleton stood up from his seat in the front row. He buttoned his charcoal suit jacket. He walked to the center podium with perfectly measured steps. He did not look like a broken old man seeking revenge. He looked exactly like the senior executive who had commanded corporate boardrooms for 4 decades. He addressed the judge, first speaking about the sacred nature of family trust and the devastation of financial betrayal. Then he turned his head and looked directly at Marcus Thorne. "You audited my family looking for a weakness," Arthur said. His voice was a deep and resonant baritone that commanded the entire room. "You found a grieving daughter and you weaponized her sorrow. You believed my age made me a quiet and easy target. You assumed I would simply fade into the background out of embarrassment. You made a catastrophic miscalculation." Marcus refused to meet his eyes, staring blankly at the polished wooden table. Arthur then turned his gaze toward his daughter. Claire looked up at him with eyes brimming with fresh tears. "Claire committed a terrible crime," Arthur continued, his voice softening just a fraction but retaining its unyielding authority. "She betrayed my trust and she must pay the appropriate price for her actions. But she was led into the dark by a career predator who has a documented history of destroying women. Today she took full responsibility. She did not hide behind lies and she did not attempt to shift the blame. I asked this court to permanently remove Marcus Thorne from society. But I asked for judicial leniency for my daughter. She is a victim of his psychological manipulation just as much as she is an accessory to his greed." The judge nodded solemnly and reviewed her extensive notes. The courtroom fell perfectly silent as she prepared to deliver the final judgments. The judge ordered Marcus Thorne to stand. She delivered a blistering reprimand regarding his parasitic lifestyle and his utter lack of human empathy. Marcus was found guilty on all charges. He was sentenced to 7 years in a federal penitentiary with no possibility of early parole. He was additionally ordered to pay full financial restitution to Arthur and clear his massive child support debts. 2 heavy-set bailiffs immediately grabbed his arms and escorted him out of the courtroom. He was dragged through the side doors without looking back. Then the judge addressed Claire. The judge acknowledged the severe and damaging nature of the wire fraud. Betraying a vulnerable parent was a serious felony. However, the judge also noted Claire had provided instrumental cooperation in dismantling the criminal operation. Her testimony and the provided emails had secured the conviction against a dangerous serial fraudster. Claire Pendleton was sentenced to 18 months in a minimum security correctional facility, followed by 3 years of supervised probation. She was also ordered to share the burden of financial restitution. Claire stood up slowly. She did not argue and she did not collapse. She accepted the heavy reality of her punishment with a newfound quiet dignity. As the court officers approached to take her into custody, she turned around to look at the gallery. She found her father standing tall in the front row. The toxic anger and the blinding arrogance that had poisoned her heart for years were completely gone. She mouthed 2 silent words to him before she was led away through the heavy wooden doors. "I am sorry." Arthur watched her disappear into the holding area, knowing the most painful battle of the war was finally over. The poison had been drawn out and the long process of healing could finally begin. 14 days after the trial ended, Arthur Pendleton drove north along the deserted highway. The spring sky was clear and vast. His destination was the state's minimum security correctional facility, where Claire was beginning her 18-month sentence. The barbed wire fences and concrete guard posts that loomed before him didn't faze him. As a father, he had already entered the darkest chambers of his daughter's soul. A physical prison could no longer deter him. Arthur passed through the strict security gates and sat down in the cold metal chair in the visiting room. Before him was a thick, clear pane of tempered glass. He waited 20 minutes before the door on the other side opened. Claire entered. In stark contrast to the expensive designer silk dresses Marcus had encouraged her to wear, she was now clad in the standard khaki uniform of the correctional facility. Her hair was neatly tied back, her unadorned face showing signs of fatigue, yet possessing a strange serenity. For the first time in years, Arthur no longer saw the arrogant and defensive facade on his daughter's face. The fog of manipulation had completely dissipated. She sat down opposite him and timidly picked up the black telephone. Arthur followed suit. Silence lingered for the first few seconds, broken only by the soft sound of breathing through the line. "I'm sorry," Claire whispered. Her voice trembled, but there was no avoidance. "I said this in court, but I need to say it directly to you, Father. I was blind, I was greedy, and I used the pain of losing Mother to justify the worst things. I'm truly sorry for hurting you." Arthur gazed deeply into his daughter's eyes. At 68, he had experienced all the ups and downs of life, but this moment carried a completely different weight. He didn't see a criminal serving a sentence. He only saw the child who used to hold his hand as they walked in a park, the child who had lost their way when darkness fell over their family. "I forgave you before the trial even began," Arthur replied softly. His voice was warm and calm, carrying the stillness of someone who had let go of all resentment. "But today, I also have something to say to you. Your downfall is partly my fault. When Eleanor died, I didn't know how to face that emptiness. I buried myself in work and numbers to escape the pain. I built an invisible wall around myself and left you crying outside. That con artist stepped into the very void I created. I'm sorry I wasn't there for you when you needed me most." Tears welled up in Claire's eyes, falling onto her rough uniform. For the first time since Eleanor's funeral 4 years ago, father and daughter had truly spoken to each other. There was no criticism, no lies, no sign of any manipulator. The prison glass separated them physically, but it witnessed the invisible wall between their souls completely crumble. "I'm so scared," Claire sobbed over the phone. 18 months here. And when I get out, I'll have a criminal sentence. I don't know how I'll start over. I'm afraid I've ruined my whole life." Arthur placed a hand on the glass. The instinct of the man who had once dominated the financial world surged, not to crush his rival, but to support the most important person in his life. "Listen to me," Arthur said, his voice firm and strong. 18 months in here is just a stop, not the end. You have paid the price for your mistake, and when that time is over, that debt will be completely erased. Father, you spent 3 years in darkness, and I spent over 6 months deceived by a shadow. We can't get that time back, but we have a future ahead of us. I will learn to be stronger from this very breakdown." Claire looked up at him, her eyes blurred with tears but reflecting a faint glimmer of hope. "I will wait for you," Arthur continued, each word clear and certain. "Whether it's 18 months or 18 years, I will still be here. Our house will always be open for you to return. You are my daughter, and no sentence or deceiver can change that. We will start over." Claire slowly placed her hand on the glass, pressing it against the spot where her father's hand had been on the other side. Warmth cannot penetrate the cold insulation material, but the bond has spread to the very depths of the heart. "I love you, Dad," Claire smiled through her tears. "I love you too," Arthur replied. When the visiting hours bell rang, Claire stood up. She no longer looked like a fragile, broken girl. She nodded goodbye to her father, her eyes reflecting a quiet determination, then turned and followed the guard. Arthur sat for a moment longer, watching his daughter's figure until it disappeared behind the steel door. A deep, complete sense of peace filled the former bank manager's chest. The revenge had ended in court, but salvation truly began here. 6 months after the heavy steel doors closed behind Claire, the Pendleton house felt entirely different. The stifling and oppressive silence that had haunted Arthur for 4 years was completely gone. It was replaced by a quiet and profound sense of purpose. Arthur sat in his study with the warm afternoon sunlight streaming across his mahogany desk. Next to the framed photograph of his late wife Eleanor rested a crisp stack of legal documents. It was the official operating charter for the Eleanor Pendleton Trust. Arthur had utilized a significant portion of his fully recovered retirement funds to establish the foundation. Its sole purpose was to provide free legal representation and financial auditing services for elderly individuals who were victims of domestic manipulation and financial abuse. He was taking the precise tactical blueprint he used to dismantle Marcus Thorne and offering it to those who could not fight back themselves. He was ensuring that predators would never find an easy target in his city again. He reached across the desk and picked up a handwritten envelope. The letters from Claire arrived every single week like clockwork. He opened the envelope carefully and read her neat handwriting. "Dear Dad," she wrote. "I spent the morning working in the facility library. It is quiet here and it gives me a lot of time to think. I am attending my therapy sessions twice a week. It is incredibly painful to confront the anger and the blinding entitlement I carried for so long, but it is helping me understand exactly who I really am. I realize now that I was trying to fill the devastating void Mom left behind with the worst possible substitute. I am slowly learning to forgive myself and I am counting the days until my 18 months are up. I cannot wait to walk through the front door and drink coffee with you again. I read about the foundation you started in the local paper. You are saving people, Dad. I am so incredibly proud to be your daughter. I love you." Arthur folded the letter and placed it gently inside the top drawer of his desk. He leaned back in his heavy leather chair and closed his eyes. The 68-year-old retired banker had finally found his absolute peace. He had successfully protected his daughter from a terrible fate. He had fulfilled the sacred promise he made to his dying wife. The brutal storm was finally over and the foundation of his family remained standing stronger than ever. The story of Arthur Pendleton is a profound reminder that true love does not always mean blind compliance. Sometimes the most protective thing a parent can do is allow a comfortable illusion to shatter completely so the brutal truth can be revealed. Society often mistakes silence for weakness and advanced age for helplessness. Arthur proved that true power does not ever need to shout. It waits patiently, it calculates precisely, and it strikes with the undeniable weight of justice. This journey teaches us that boundaries are absolutely critical when navigating grief and family dynamics. Predators will always seek out the vulnerable by using loneliness as their entry point. But manipulation can only survive in the shadows. Once you expose it to the light, it loses all of its power. We must protect our families, but we must also hold them accountable. Redemption is always possible, but it must be earned through pure honesty and accountability. If this story of tough love, financial justice, and reclaiming family dignity resonated with you today, please hit the subscribe button, leave a like, and share this video so you can listen to more captivating stories every single day. How did this story make you feel? Have you ever had to make a painful decision to protect someone you love from their own terrible mistakes, or witnessed a situation where age was vastly underestimated? Please share your thoughts in the comments below. I truly want to hear the feelings and perspectives from deep within your heart. I wish everyone watching this video robust health, a joyful daily life, and absolute peace in whatever challenges you are currently facing. Thank you for spending your valuable time with us today. Goodbye, and I will see you in the next video.